At our wedding anniversary, the waiter said, "It's nice seeing you again." My husband froze. "Hi Reddit, so nice to be here after so long." As you guys might know, I took a bit of a break from social media. I especially took a break from Reddit. I was getting super overwhelmed by all the bad stories I was seeing on here, particularly on this sub. It wasn't great for my mental health, but I'm back now, and I have a story of my own. I know you read the title, but please, no judgment until the end, okay? My name is Olivia, 46 female. I've been married to my hubby, Jackson, 46 male, for 20 years now. We've been together for 25. I've been with him longer than I've been without him. We met in 1999 on New Year's Eve. I've experienced a lot of New Year's, 45 of them, and let me tell you, I have never felt better energy around one of them like I did in 1999. It was the turn of the century. Almost everyone alive then knew that they probably won't live to see another century pass. That sounded morbid, sorry, but it was true. People were on the street partying. It felt like entering a new era. It felt like the beginning of something new. When the countdown timer went down, I had lost my then boyfriend in the crowd. He wasn't that important to me. He was just the guy I was with in college. Looking back, I didn't even like him that much. Fun fact, after I lost him in the crowd that day, I literally never saw him again. He transferred to a different college and got a new number. I never cared enough to look him up on social media in the coming years. Sorry, I digress. Yes, New Year's Eve, 1999. I had lost my boyfriend, but I did want someone to kiss when the clock hit midnight. Everyone was getting coupled up. I had to be one of the 5 single people in that crowd. Somehow, I had to find one of the others. As fate would have it, I bumped right into one, back against back. The countdown started as we apologized to each other. The countdown hit 5 as we just stared at each other. 4, we both noticed we were alone. 3, I moved. 2, he moved. 1, he raised an eyebrow at me. "You sure?" I nodded. 0, we pressed our lips against each other. The fireworks went off both around us and inside me. Maybe it was just the energy of the day, but the kiss felt electric. I've never had a better kiss till date, and we didn't even use tongue. People spend their entire lives looking for chemistry like that, and there I was, having insane chemistry with someone I just met. We pulled away, and he smiled at me. My name's Jackson, by the way. We went right back to kissing again. When we pulled away the second time, it was like the world had gone quiet. The fireworks were still going off. People were screaming and hugging and kissing around us, but I barely heard any of it. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the faint ringing in my ears. We just stood there, staring at each other. His lips were a little red from the cold, and mine were trembling. I wasn't sure if it was from the weather, middle of winter, guys, or from what had just happened. He smiled, and I smiled back because what else was I supposed to do? It felt natural. I didn't ask to exchange numbers right then. I didn't really want to ask. I just thought that we shared an intimate moment together. I didn't want to make us a thing. Plus, at that point, Jackson was a complete stranger. I thought I'd never see him again. Before I could pull away and disappear away from him and into the crowd, he tightened his hold on my waist. "Do you have a phone? Can I get your number?" I'd always had a problem with saying no, so when Jackson pulled out his Nokia and handed it over to me, I put my number in. It didn't even occur to me that I could have put in a wrong number. Jackson smiled at me and asked how long I was in the city for. I told him I had no idea. I had no idea where I was even going to sleep that night. Jackson whispered in my ear. That was the only way I could hear him over the noise. "If you're still here in a week, why don't I take you out to dinner?" And then he disappeared into the crowd. I ended up calling my dad to send some money over. I slept in a very cheap hostel on New Year's Day, and then when the money hit that evening, I got myself a nice fancy hotel. I was 20 years old in New York on New Year's. I felt on top of the effing world. Nothing could bring me down. Not the fact that I had been missing so many classes that semester. Not the fact that I had no idea where my supposed boyfriend was. Nothing. And to top it off, I had a perfect kiss to start my year. As for the man responsible for the perfect kiss, I really didn't want to see him again. He wasn't really my type. I liked them tall and lean with dark hair. Think Christian Bale in American Psycho. Jackson was the opposite of that. He was blonde and only 2 inches taller than me. He was a little burlier than I liked my men too. So despite him calling me twice the day after New Year's, I ignored them completely. I spent my days rolling around in those hotel sheets, going out shipping and trying out different restaurants, but it got old pretty fast. The only people I knew in the city were my parents' friends who were 3 times my age, and their kids who were all snooty and arrogant. I contemplated calling Jackson, but I didn't. He had stopped calling after 2 days, and I didn't want to seem like I missed the attention. Just 4 days after New Year's, I was thinking of just going to my parents' house in Connecticut. It was very boring there too, but at least I would have had people to talk to. I packed up my bags and paid off the tab of drinks I ordered. I was to leave by 11, and by 9, I really wanted a coffee. So I went down a couple of blocks to this really cute coffee shop. I was in line just trying to get some coffee in my system so I could function when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, and there he was, Jackson, from New Year's Eve. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. He looked different without all the chaos of the party around him. He actually wasn't as blonde as the fireworks made him look. It was much softer. He was still only a little taller than me, and his muscles stood out a lot in the tight shirt he was wearing. I remember laughing because I couldn't believe it. The guy I've been avoiding for days was somehow in the same coffee shop as I was completely coincidentally, while I had almost lost my mind from boredom. He said he'd been hoping to run into me. I don't even remember what I said back. We ended up chatting it up while still in line. While he still wasn't my usual type, I found him funny, and he was handsome, in a different way. We got our coffees and stepped out into the city. He was going one way, down into the subway station, and I was going the other, back to my hotel. I found myself reluctant to leave him. I made small talk as much as I could to stall outside the coffee shop, but small talk only lasts so long. That's why they call it small talk. There was a lull in the conversation, and he was already angling his body away from me. I knew that if he left, I would go to Connecticut in a few hours, and Lord knows, I would probably never see him again. For some reason, I couldn't bear the thought, so I blurted out, "What about that date?" "No." He turned to me and said, "I thought you were leaving today." I shrugged. "I could make it work if you can." We arranged for a date that evening. I ran down to my hotel and told the manager that I was staying an extra day. He knew my mother and was more than happy to let me extend. That evening, Jackson came to pick me up at the front of the hotel. He whistled when he saw the hotel and jokingly asked if I was part of the mafia. I rolled my eyes at that one. I figured that eventually I would tell him about my family's business and all the money, but for now, it wasn't necessary. The place he took me to was very nouveau riche. It felt like the kind of place that people went to when they were trying to convince others that they had a ton of money. But I didn't want to put it down in front of Jackson. He was a struggling college student that was juggling 2 jobs and a side hustle. He probably saved up for months for a place like this. So when he asked me if I liked the place, I smiled and said yes. Later, when my parents asked about it, I told them the truth. It was too flashy and tacky to be a truly fancy place. In the end, the restaurant didn't matter because we just ended up talking the entire time. We didn't even order any food, just drinks. It felt like we talked for hours. We left our drinks out, the ice melted. We talked about music, classes, movies we loved, how neither of us knew what we wanted to do after graduation. There was no pretense with him, no need to try to sound impressive or clever, despite the place he picked to eat at. At the end of the night, he walked me back to the hotel. I kissed him on the cheek as I turned to leave. He asked me if he called again, would I answer this time? I nodded, and I did. He called the next day as the driver my parents sent down loaded my things in the trunk. He stayed on the call with me for an hour. That was the beginning of us. After that, everything just sort of fell into place. This is not me saying it was easy. It wasn't. In fact, the universe seemed to be testing us right from the start. I was at Yale and Jackson went to NYU, which meant we were a good 2-3 hours apart on a good day, much longer if the trains were running late, which they always seemed to be. It wasn't an impossible distance, but it was enough to make every visit feel like a whole thing. I'd pack a little overnight bag every other weekend and take the train down to the city, my heart thumping every time the skyline came into view. He'd be waiting for me at the station, usually with some ridiculous snack or drink he thought I had to try. Sometimes it was a slice of greasy pizza, sometimes a weird canned soda from a bodega. Then we'd walk all the way to his apartment. He didn't have a lot of money, but he had time. And when you're 20 and you've never really dated anyone you seriously care for before, that feels like the same thing. Our dates were small. He never took me to any tacky restaurant like he did on our first date ever again. Instead, we would go walking through Central Park or sneak into those pretentious art exhibits, or we'd just watch street performers in Washington Square Park. We'd make up stories about strangers and pretend we knew their lives. It felt nice to be serenaded without money. I'd never known anything like that before Jackson. On the weekends that I couldn't make it, he'd call. No video chats back then, just long phone calls that lasted until one of us fell asleep. I'd hear him breathing on the other end of the line and imagine he was right next to me. It sounds silly, but sometimes I'd even leave the phone on speaker and fall asleep to the sound of him typing or shuffling papers. There was something comforting about it. We had our share of fights, too. Long distance has a way of magnifying little things. Missed calls turned into arguments about priorities, late replies into assumptions about disinterest. There were nights when I'd hang up on him crying, and mornings when I'd call him back like nothing happened. We were both very young and dramatic, but more importantly, we were also very patient. When I went home to Connecticut for the holidays, he'd come up to visit. My parents were polite, maybe a little too polite, but they didn't like him much. They didn't say much about him, but I could tell they didn't love the idea of me dating someone who was still figuring himself out. They also didn't like the fact that he didn't come from money. He had no trust fund, no assured job after college, no brownstone to inherit. My dad used to drop hints about grad school, law school, and taking over the family business after school. Really, anything that sounded like a plan. Jackson, on the other hand, was working part-time at a bookstore and as a waiter and trying to get into a film program. He made it clear to my dad that he wasn't lost in life, he was just taking his time. My parents didn't understand that kind of patience. I did. I understood everything Jackson did. We made it work through the rest of my junior year, though there were moments when I wasn't sure we would. I remember once, during a particularly stressful week, I told him I didn't think I could do it anymore. I was exhausted and stressed and convinced that being in love with someone I saw twice a month was making everything harder. He didn't argue. He just said, "Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll still be here." A week later, after a bunch of tests and evaluations, I called him from the train. I was on my way to him. He didn't even bring it up. He just said, "You hungry?" The real crack started to show in my senior year. Well, both our senior years. Jackson was always busy. Even when I went over to his place, it felt like he wasn't paying any attention to me. Eventually, I stopped going. He stopped calling. When we did talk, we would argue constantly and just let that anger stew in us until we called again. Then we'd argue again, and the cycle would just repeat itself, as cycles tend to do. This was when I met Tim, 47 male. Well, he was 22 then. Jackson and I hadn't talked in almost a week, and I was feeling pretty moody. I went down to the liquor store and got myself the most expensive bottle of wine. Tim was the checkout guy. He raised an eyebrow when he saw my wine. "Girls' night?" "I wish. Just a long day, a long week, really." He laughed. He had such a nice laugh, soft and throaty like they're being held back a little. Or maybe he just smoked a lot. Who knows? "Rough semester?" he asked as he rang up the wine. His tone wasn't flirty, but I've been around enough men to know when they are testing the waters a little bit. I also saw him looking me up and down. He was obviously attracted to me. He was good-looking, too, very stereotypically my type. That was what made me look at him a moment longer than I should have. He noticed me checking him out, too, and smirked at me. "Something like that," I said. I went home and didn't think of Tim at all. Two strangers found each other attractive? Big deal. It happens all the time. He was just a guy at the register, one of dozens of people you talk to in a week and forget immediately after. The next time I saw him, it was raining. I'd gone back to the store because I'd run out of coffee, and the campus cafe was already closed. I had failed a test. My parents were refusing to increase my allowance. I was in a really bad mood. I had had the worst day. While I knew then and know now that alcohol is not a healthy coping mechanism, I didn't have an alternative. It was either I drank an entire bottle or I cried myself to sleep. Tim was at the counter again, same stupid good-looking face, and he remembered me. He said, "Back for round two?" I said I just needed something to survive the week. He grinned and said, "Then you're at the right altar." It became a sort of routine after that. Okay, a bad habit more like. I'd stop by once or twice a week, always buying something. I had a bit of a problem back then, okay? Sometimes he'd already be looking at the door when I walked in like he'd been expecting me. He probably was. I came in at the same time. He probably knew that too. It wasn't like we were close right away. It took a while. He told me he was taking night classes at Yale, working his way through school, no scholarships, no family money. He wanted to teach history, maybe philosophy, if he could ever afford grad school. There was something very grounded about him. He didn't seem to have very big dreams. He just wanted a decent life. It made him seem older than he was, even though he was only a year older than me. When I think about it now, I realize what drew me to him wasn't just attraction, at least not at first. It was the lack of burden. With Tim, there was no history to carry. I didn't have to be a patient girlfriend. It started innocent enough, but it didn't stay that way. One night, Tim walked me home from the store. He was closing up the store early because his manager said he could. It was also a Saturday, and he only worked night shifts on the weekend because of his classes. It was late, and the air smelled like rain. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, and his hair was sticking out everywhere like he'd been running his hands through them all night. I wanted to run my hand through his hair too. I remember feeling bad for having those thoughts. Technically, I still had a boyfriend. I knew it was wrong to be having those thoughts about someone else who was definitely not my boyfriend. We were both exhausted, dragging our feet behind us. We were also talking about how we'd probably both fail our finals. When we got to my dorm, I thanked him for walking me and started to turn away, but he said, "Hey, you okay?" That's all it took. I wasn't okay. Jackson and I had fought earlier that week. I'd hung up on him, told him I needed space, and he hadn't called back. I felt like I was unraveling, so I told him. I was careful not to mention Jackson. For some reason, I didn't want Tim to know that I had a boyfriend. I just told him about how lonely I felt even when I wasn't alone. He was very gentle about it. I went to bed that night feeling a little less lonely. After that night, I started looking forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to Jackson's calls. I'd check my phone for texts from Tim. I started dressing a little nicer when I knew I'd stop by the store. The night it finally happened, I swear I didn't plan it. I wasn't buying a bottle of wine every week anymore, thank God, but I was still going to the liquor store a lot to talk to Tim. This particular time, I'd gone to return a book he'd lent me. I got there, and it was someone else at the till. Turns out that Tim couldn't make it for his shift. I really wanted to see him, so I decided to go to his place. He lived off campus in a small apartment with no roommates. When I got there, the lights were dim, and he had his little TV playing quietly in the corner. He handed me a towel, made a joke about how I looked like a wet cat, and I laughed, but my chest hurt. I think we both knew what was going to happen before either of us moved. We kissed, and he took me to bed. I left before the sun came up and walked all the way back to my dorm. Jackson called me that night. He said he missed me, that he'd been thinking about driving up to see me that weekend. I couldn't speak for a moment because my throat felt tight. I said I missed him too. We made up and promised to be better partners to each other. I saw Tim once more. I told him I couldn't see him anymore and that I loved someone else. He just looked sad, like he already knew how it would end. Jackson and I found our rhythm again. After graduation, I moved to New York to be with him. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. We got a decently sized apartment in Manhattan. We could have gotten a much better one, but Jackson absolutely refused my parents' help with both money and a realtor. It wasn't the biggest apartment in the world, but we were happy. We'd been long distance for so long that whenever we'd wake up tangled in each other on the bed, I'd think that I had to go soon. It took a couple of months for me to get used to the idea that I wasn't going anywhere. Jackson wasn't going anywhere either. We built a life together. We'd go grocery shopping together, counting every dollar and still somehow coming home with 3 different kinds of cereal. I took a job at one of my dad's friend's firm. It was just a temporary thing until my parents felt that I was mature enough to come into the family business. The plan was after coming into the business, I'd take a little break and go to law school for a bit. After that, I'd take over fully as CFO or something. Meanwhile, Jackson started to work at a small publishing firm. and he started doing freelance editing work while still chasing his film dream.
No.
We got married about 3 years after moving in together. If it hasn't been clear already, I'm an only child. My parents went all out with it. Jackson couldn't even let his pride get in the way and refused their money. It was a good wedding. It was perfect. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We fought, but we loved each other so much that we never reverted back to who we were in our senior years. My eyes never strayed again, until very recently. It started a few weeks ago. Out of nowhere, I got an email from Tim. The subject line just said, "Long time." I almost deleted it without opening it, but it's been over 20 years since I'd seen him. Sue me, I was curious. I opened it. He said he'd found me through an old alumni network, that he was in the city for a few weeks teaching a summer program and had thought of me. He said he didn't even know if I'd remember him. I laughed at that. Actually laughed out loud, because of course I remembered him. How could I forget the first person I'd ever cheated on someone with? Sorry, bad joke. He said he'd love to catch up. Just dinner between two old friends. He even mentioned Jackson. He said that he'd read about one of Jackson's documentaries in a film journal and congratulated me on marrying an artist. I stared at the message for a long time before I wrote back. I told him it'd be nice to catch up. When I told Jackson I had a late meeting that evening, he didn't question it. Why would he? I'd never given him a reason to. I'd been faithful for more than 20 years. Tim chose the restaurant. It was a quiet little Italian place near Bryant Park. The lighting was low and golden, very romantic. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked older, of course. The sharpness in his jaw had softened, and his hair was streaked with gray, but he still had that same way of holding himself. When he stood up and smiled, I felt something catch in my throat. He hugged me. I could smell his cologne, faint and woodsy, the same kind he used to wear when we were young. When we sat down, there was this awkward beat where neither of us knew what to say. Then it passed. We talked about everything from Yale to the people we used to know to where life had taken us. He told me about his kids, about his wife who was wonderful mostly. I told him about Jackson, about our life in the city, our daughter in high school. Every time he looked at me, I felt that old tension. Halfway through dinner, he reached across the table and brushed his fingers against my hand. We kept talking, but I was hyper aware of his hand brushing up on mine. Every word after that felt loaded. When the waiter brought the check, neither of us moved. As I felt the waiter start to move away, I leaned in and he kissed him. Just a few seconds. My first thought was how familiar it felt. It was like muscle memory, like discovering how to ride a bike. My second thought was that I'd just ruined everything. I pulled away first. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but I didn't let him. I just said I should go, got up, and walked away. I didn't even look back. I walked the entire 12 blocks home without taking a single cab or train. The rain soaked through my hair, my coat, everything, and I felt miserable. Since that night, I can't stop thinking about it. Guilt has built up in me. I feel like I am always 2 seconds away from blurting out the truth to Jackson. Tim has texted me twice since then. I haven't replied. But I also haven't blocked his number. I've just been content to pretend he doesn't exist. A week ago, everything changed. Jackson and I celebrated our 20-year anniversary. Jackson has never been the grand gesture type, but this time he said he wanted to take me out. It was going to be just the two of us. No daughter, no friends, no family. A proper night out. He booked a table at this restaurant in Midtown. I didn't recognize the name when he told me, but when we walked in, my heart nearly stopped. It was the same Italian place where I'd met Tim a few weeks before. My stomach twisted the second we walked through the door. I remember trying to act normal, forcing a laugh when the hostess complimented my dress. Jackson looked good, really good actually. He'd even worn the blue shirt I bought him last Christmas, the one that brings out his eyes. He held my hand as we were led to the table, and I tried to focus on that, on him, on the fact that this was supposed to be our night. The hostess sat us near the window, 2 tables down from where I'd sat with Tim. I know that because I couldn't stop glancing over. It was like my body was betraying me. Jackson didn't notice. He was in a great mood. He kept joking about how old we were getting, how we'd officially been together longer than we'd been apart. He ordered wine, the same bottle we'd had at our wedding. It was such a nostalgic touch that almost made me cry. He looked at me across the table and said, 20 years, can you believe it? I smiled. I said I couldn't, but the guilt was sitting heavy in my heart. Every time he reached for my hand, my brain played the same memory of how Tim's hand had brushed mine across a table just like this one. And then the waiter came. He smiled at Jackson first, then turned to me. He smiled even wider. It's nice seeing you again. It was the same waiter that served Tim and I. I felt myself stiffen. I turned to look at Jackson, and he was frozen too, looking between me and the waiter. The waiter seemed to realize something was off, because he quickly added, "Oh, sorry, I must have you mixed up with someone else," and gave a nervous little laugh before stepping away. Jackson stared at me. "Do you know him?" he asked. I hesitated. I knew I had to lie, but I wasn't even sure how to. "No," I said. "No, I don't think so. Just looks familiar." Jackson nodded. We made small talk. I told him about something at work. He told me about a film he was editing. But there was a weird vibe now. He kept glancing around the restaurant, scanning the room. When the waiter came back, he wouldn't look at me. He just asked what we were celebrating. I opened my mouth to tell him that it was none of his business, but Jackson beat me to it. 20-year anniversary. He even reached across the table for my hand. His were cold. Mine were warm and sweaty. The waiter looked at our joined hands and then looked at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He didn't say anything. He just congratulated us and walked away. The rest of the meal was painfully quiet. Jackson barely ate. I could tell he was thinking hard. I couldn't eat either. I was so worried that the waiter would spill. Thankfully, he didn't. When the check came, I reached for my purse, but Jackson had already put his card down. He didn't even look at the total. We walked out into the night in silence. It was drizzling again, like it had been the night I kissed Tim. Jackson finally spoke when we were halfway down the block. "You didn't tell me you'd been here before." My heart stopped. "What?" "This restaurant," he said. "When we sat down, you looked around like you recognized it, I could tell. So have you been here before?" I tried to lie and say I probably came there for work. He looked at me, and I knew he didn't believe me. We walked for a little bit before Jackson slapped a hand to his forehead. He's forgotten his jacket at the restaurant. He told me to wait in a random McDonald's while he went back to get it. When he got back, jacket slung over his shoulder, his mouth was in a hard line. I knew then that the waiter had snitched. Who knows? Maybe Jackson left his jacket on purpose just so he could go back and ask the waiter, "Who's Tim McFarlane?" My heart stopped. I didn't want to have this conversation in the middle of McDonald's, so I told him we'd talk when we got home. And when we got back home, he went straight to his study and closed the door. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and just stood there. I told myself he'd cool off, and then we'd talk properly. That never happened. I must have fallen asleep on the couch because when I woke up, the house was too quiet. The sun was barely up. I called out for Jackson, but he didn't answer. I figured maybe he'd gone out for a walk or to get some air. He does that sometimes when he's upset. But when I went upstairs, the closet door was open. His side of it was empty. His suitcase was gone. I went downstairs and saw the envelope sitting on his desk in the study. My name was on it. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down before opening it. It wasn't short. Inside were 5 pages, front and back. I read them all, twice. He said that after he went back for his jacket, the waiter pulled him aside. Apparently, Jackson had asked outright if I'd been there recently, and the poor guy didn't even hesitate. He told him about that dinner a few weeks ago, said I'd been with another man, described what I was wearing, even said he thought we'd kissed. Jackson said he didn't believe him at first, but when he left the restaurant, he couldn't shake the feeling. He said he looked up the name the waiter mentioned, Tim McFarlane, and found him easily. I don't know how the conversation between them went, and Jackson didn't write every detail, but he said that when he called Tim, the man didn't deny it. He apparently told Jackson everything, about our friendship in college, about what happened, about how I came to see him again just weeks ago. I don't know why Tim would tell him all of that. Maybe guilt finally caught up with him. Jackson wrote that reading Tim's tone made it clear that what he was hearing wasn't a lie. He told me that he'd loved me since the moment I turned around in that crowd in 1999. He said he built his whole life around the idea that I was his home, that even when things got hard, He always thought we'd make it because he believed in me. He said the thought that I could look at another man, even 20 years ago, and choose him, shattered something in him. He said he didn't hate me, but that he couldn't live with me anymore. He asked for a divorce, said he'd already called a lawyer, and he asked that I not contact him until he reached out first. I must have sat there for hours just crying. My shirt was wet when I finally stood up. The next few days were a blur. Our daughter Lucy found out almost immediately. Jackson told her before I had the chance to explain. She's 17. She wouldn't even look at me when she packed a bag to stay with her dad. I haven't seen her since. She won't answer my calls or texts. She unfollowed me on everything. I just wish I could tell her I'm sorry without it sounding pathetic. Then a few days later, everything went public. I still don't know how, but an article showed up online. Filmmaker's marriage implodes after affair revelation. They didn't use our full names, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. My parents were livid. Not about the affair, not really. They never cared for Jackson even after all these years. They were livid about the scandal. My family's business is built on reputation. My father called me into his office the day after the story broke. He told me he thought it would be best if I stepped down as CFO for a while. That was 3 days ago. I haven't gone back since. Technically, I am unemployed. Now it's just me in this big, quiet apartment. His things are gone. Lucy's room looks untouched, like she'll come back any second, but I know she won't. I feel so sad. I want my family back. I want my reputation back. I want my effing job back. I miss Jackson. The divorce proceedings start next week. By then, it'll be official. I wrote this so at least some people can see my side of the story. I'm not the villain in this story. No one is. I just want a bit of understanding. Is that so hard to get? Signing off now. See ya. Comment. Commenter 1. I'm not the villain. Who is then? Def not Jackson. You threw away your life for some guy probably named Timothy. Commenter 2. So it's been a week. Are you divorced yet? OP replies, yes, we are. He took almost everything and has custody of Lucy. Not like she wanted to see me anyway. I was so depressed I had to move back in with my parents. Commenter 2. Good.